Snow fell over Winter Haven like a prayer whispered by the mountains, soft and bright against the darkened forest. In the fading light, a lone cabin stood half buried beneath the storm, its chimney breathing thin curls of smoke into the frozen sky. And at its doorstep, a German shepherd paused mid-step, ears lifting as if he had heard a heartbeat the world had forgotten. Inside, a veteran who had lost everything tended a fire he no longer believed could warm his own grief. But he had no idea that on this night, God was guiding a stranger toward his door, a woman with secrets heavy enough to break her, and a miracle quiet enough to change them both forever. Because sometimes the coldest storms carry the warmest stories, and sometimes salvation arrives in the footsteps of a weary traveler and the steady breath of a loyal dog. Winter Haven, Montana, had a way of swallowing sound long before snow ever touched the ground. In late November, the valley usually braced itself for the slow, polite arrival of winter. But this year, winter did not walk into town. It lunged. The sky had turned the color of hammered steel, and the wind slid across the alpine ridges like a blade looking for a place to break. The locals said storms up here carried moods, and this one carried something close to grief. Jonah Riker felt it before he saw it. He always did. Jonah was the kind of man who read the weather with the same grim intuition he once used to read danger during his years in the Air Force Rescue Squadron. Now, 41, he carried a look that storms respected. Tall, lean, hard-edged like the mountain itself. His dark brown hair was peppered with early gray, not from age but from the thousand things he never said out loud. His face was angular, wind-burned, and marked by a thin scar near his right temple that hinted at a mission gone wrong many years ago. His eyes were a muted green, steady and thoughtful, the eyes of someone who had seen people slip between life and death too many times to count. People used to describe Jonah as calm, reliable, unshakably brave, even warm in the rare moments he allowed anyone close. But that was before the rescue mission that took the life of his fiancé, Claire Wesson, a wildfire researcher with a laugh like summer rain. She had died during an extraction Jonah himself had been guiding. Since then, he had retreated to this lonely strip of mountain, shedding society like a skin that no longer fit. Years of guilt had carved silence into his bones. Now he lived in a timber cabin overlooking Frost Ridge, spending most days cutting firewood, checking trap lines, and pretending the world farther down the mountain didn't exist. Only one creature had managed to stay by his side through all of it. Shadow trotted a few steps ahead of him now, his paws kicking up small bursts of frost from the forest floor. The German shepherd was 5 years old, tall for his breed, with a smoky gray coat that looked almost wolfish and a black muzzle that made him appear perpetually deep in thought. His eyes, startling amber, had a way of studying people as if he were cataloging their intentions. Shadow wasn't just a dog, he was the last piece of Jonah's old life, a partner assigned to him after Claire's passing to help him manage the fallout of trauma. At first, Jonah had tried to resist bonding with the dog, refusing training sessions, keeping emotional distance, feeding him with mechanical care. But Shadow had a stubborn way of loving. He stayed near, nudged gently when Jonah's breathing changed, and lay by the bed during the worst nights. Jonah never admitted it aloud, but Shadow had saved him more times than Jonah had saved anyone else. Today, Shadow was restless. The dog's tail was down, his ears pricked, muscles coiled in a way Jonah recognized from their old training days. Shadow had caught something on the wind. Jonah adjusted his gloves, pulling them tighter around his roughened hands. "Easy," he murmured, though his voice held its usual rasping reserve. He always spoke to Shadow like the dog understood English in full sentences, and honestly, he often did. The two were following a narrow path that veered along the cliffline, checking for storm damage before the blizzard hit in full. Winter Haven was a quiet town, but the mountains demanded vigilance. Avalanches, downed trees, and sudden squalls had a way of turning a simple walk into a survival scenario within minutes, and today's sky warned that minutes were all they had. Shadow stopped abruptly, his head lifted, his nose twitched once, twice, then he growled. It wasn't a fierce growl filled with aggression. It was the tense, low vibration of a dog recognizing that something in the environment did not belong. Not an animal, not wind, not nature. Something human. Jonah stopped beside him. "What is it, boy?" Shadow answered with a bark, short, sharp, urgent. The sound cut through the cold air like a thrown knife. Jonah's pulse tightened. Shadow was trained never to alarm without cause. The dog barked again, spun left on his paws, and sprinted into the trees with a speed that made Jonah curse under his breath. Snow had not begun falling yet, but the air was heavy with its promise. The world smelled like metal and pine, and something else too. Fear, faint and unfamiliar. Jonah broke into a run. Branches slapped his jacket. His boots bit into the half-frozen ground as he followed the streak of gray fur weaving through the forest. "Shadow!" he shouted. The dog didn't stop. He only barked again, the bark shifting from warning to insistence. Jonah followed it into a clearing he barely recognized. The Frost Ridge rental cabin, a place owned by a retired couple who rented it to tourists, stood dark and hunched beneath gathering clouds. Its porch light was off. The curtains were drawn. No tire tracks marred the frost near the steps. The place should have been empty. But Shadow was clawing the door. Jonah felt his stomach harden. "That's not good," he muttered. The dog whined, not in fear, but urgency. Jonah approached the door cautiously. The cabin's lock was broken. The latch hung crooked, as if someone had closed it too fast or too carelessly. Jonah pushed. The door swung inward with a soft groan. The temperature inside was worse than outside, cold, stagnant, carrying the faint, brittle smell of someone trying too hard not to cry. In the dimness of the single-window cabin, Jonah saw her, a young woman, sitting in a broken wheelchair, wrapped in a thin coat too fancy for the mountains and far too light for the weather. Her hair, a pale blonde that seemed almost silver under the weak light, was matted around her cheeks. Her face was delicate yet drawn tight with stress, the kind of face used to elegance, but now painted with fear. She looked 26, maybe 27, tall, slim, with long fingers clutching the armrest in a way that suggested she wasn't used to clinging to anything. Her eyes were a soft blue, but the blue of frightened sky before lightning hits. Her name, she said later, was Maren Hale, a woman raised in San Francisco high society, a daughter of tech empire wealth, polished through charity galas and private schools. The world had always expected her to smile, to be composed, to be perfect. But perfection had left her brittle, and brittleness had brought her here. Today she looked nothing like the polished socialite she was raised to be. She looked lost, terrified, and so cold her lips had turned the color of bruised violets. Shadow inched closer to her, sniffing with a low rumble. Not aggression, but examination. Jonah instinctively stepped between them, raising a gloved hand. "You hurt?" he asked. The woman flinched. He left. He left me here." Jonah blinked. "Who?" Maren swallowed, tears gathering but refusing to fall. "My fiancé. We fought. He got angry. He took the car. My wheelchair." She gestured weakly to the bent wheel. "I couldn't follow. I thought maybe he'd come back." She looked toward the frosted window as if expecting a miracle. None came. Jonah studied her, the cabin, the broken lock, the fading warmth of the air. Something was off. Her clothes were too expensive for someone planning a mountain trip. Her perfume, faint but unmistakably costly, was out of place among pine walls. But fear made people strange, and right now, fear radiated from her like heat from a dying ember. Outside, the storm's first snowflakes drifted past the open doorway. Jonah exhaled slowly. The mountain was closing its fist, and whether the woman told the whole truth or not, she wouldn't survive another hour in this cold. "All right," he said, voice low but firm. "We're getting you out of here." Maren blinked. "Where?" "My cabin, 2 miles. But safer than this." Shadow barked softly as if agreeing. Jonah stepped forward to lift her, and Chapter 1 ends where the summary dictates, with the decision to bring her back before the storm hits. The first snow of the storm had begun its slow descent by the time Jonah lifted Maren Hale into his arms. It wasn't heavy yet, but the flakes were unnaturally large, broad, crystalline shapes that floated rather than fell, as if the sky were watching them and thinking twice before letting them touch the earth. Weather like that only meant one thing in Montana: danger was already walking beside them. Jonah tightened his grip around Marin, who weighed less than he expected, her frame delicate but tense with discomfort. She smelled faintly of cedar and cold perfume, the kind worn by people who attended charity galas, not wilderness cabins. Shadow, trotting at Jonah's left side, let out a soft woof as if urging them to hurry. The dog's coat bristled lightly with static from the coming storm, and his amber eyes were sharp, alert, slicing the darkness ahead into pieces he could track. Jonah spared a glance down at him. "Stay close," he said, voice low, steady. Shadow flicked his ear in acknowledgement. The wind answered for him, rising with a long, hollow note that sounded too much like grief remembering itself. The trail home was narrow, uneven, and cut along the edge of a steep ravine. At the best of times, it required careful footing. Tonight, it demanded perfection. 2 miles. Jonah had done it hundreds of times, but never while carrying a woman who trembled in his arms like glass held too tightly. He adjusted her weight as they moved past the first bend. "You holding up?" Marin's voice was thin. I think so. I'm sorry. I know I'm slowing you down." "You're not," Jonah said. He didn't add that adrenaline had pushed him past the point of noticing weight anyway. Marin kept her head tucked against his shoulder, as if listening to the heartbeat beneath his jacket. Jonah focused on the ground, the falling snow, the rhythm of Shadow's paws beside him. The world felt tight, reduced to 3 lives tethered together by necessity. A few minutes into the walk, they passed the frozen creek, a narrow snake of ice that wound through the trees. Jonah paused for half a breath. The sound of cracking nearby made him angle his head. "Who's there?" he called. Only the wind answered, but the trees shifted and a figure stepped out, an older woman wrapped in a thick sheepskin coat, her hair silver and braided over one shoulder. This was Mrs. Eleanor Price, a widow who lived half a mile from Jonah's cabin. Eleanor was a tall woman in her early 60s, with a face carved by harsh winters and a will that had survived harsher summers. Her posture was rigid from decades of ranch work, her shoulders broad, fingers thick from gripping reins and hauling bales of hay. She was known in Winter Haven for speaking in short sentences and expecting truth in return. She carried a lantern in one hand and a wooden staff in the other. Shadow relaxed the moment he saw her. He liked Eleanor, though he tolerated few people. Eleanor's steel-gray eyes swept over Jonah, the woman in his arms, and the worsening snowfall. "Storm's early," she said. Her voice sounded like stone striking stone, blunt, unembellished. "You shouldn't be out." Jonah shifted his grip on Marin. "Didn't have a choice." Eleanor stepped closer, lantern held high. The light revealed more of Marin's face, the blue lips, the pale skin, the fear tucked beneath her eyelashes. Eleanor's brow lifted. "Tourist?" she asked. "Sort of," Jonah said. "Found her in the rental cabin." Eleanor clicked her tongue in irritation. "People come here thinking the mountains are postcards. Mountains don't care about postcards." Jonah almost smiled, but the cold bit through his gloves before the expression formed. Eleanor's gaze softened a fraction, her version of deep concern. "Your place is closer than mine. Go, and keep her warm. Storm's got a mean streak tonight." Shadow barked once as if agreeing. Eleanor nodded at him. "You're a good boy," she murmured. Shadow's tail flicked once, an honor from him. Eleanor took 2 steps back, vanishing into the trees as quickly as she had appeared. Jonah continued forward, pace steady despite the increasing weight of snow. The storm thickened around them, the flakes falling faster now, turning the path into a shifting white maze. The world narrowed even more. Every sound was muffled. Every breath felt heavier. Marin shivered again. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she whispered. Jonah didn't answer. They were already halfway across the ridge, and talking felt dangerous, as if words might jinx their fragile balance. Shadow led now, stopping every few feet to check the wind, then moving again when he confirmed the way was safe. His ears twitched constantly, like 2 sensitive instruments measuring the storm's intentions. Jonah's cabin appeared only when they rounded the final bend, a dark silhouette against the blurring horizon, built from thick logs, small windows, and a stone chimney already coughing thin smoke. Warmth, shelter, safety. Shadow sprinted the last few yards and waited at the door, tail low but wagging. Jonah adjusted Marin, tightened his hold, and climbed the wooden steps. He pushed the door with his shoulder. It swung open. Heat swept out to meet them, the blessed heat of the wood-burning stove Jonah had stocked before leaving earlier that day. Inside, the cabin was dim but welcoming. A single lantern glowed on the table. A wool blanket draped over the back of the worn leather sofa. Boots by the hearth, a kettle singing faintly on the stove. This was a place that had known silence, grief, and slow healing. Tonight it would know something else. A stranger, a secret, maybe a disaster. Jonah set Marin carefully onto the sofa. The moment her body touched the cushions, Shadow came to sit beside her, alert, watchful, protective, in a way Jonah had only seen once before, long ago, when a young's neighbor's child fell and broke his arm. The dog sensed vulnerability like a scent. Jonah grabbed the heavy quilt from the wall hook and wrapped it around Marin. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling. "You didn't have to." "Yes," Jonah said. "I did." He knelt to check her pulse, soft, fast, cold, but steady. Her skin was icy along her wrists. 3 more hours in that rental cabin, and she would have slipped into hypothermia. Jonah rose, shrugged off his snow-covered jacket, and hung it by the fire. He moved efficiently, with the practiced grace of someone who understood emergencies too well. Shadow followed him, nudging his hand once, as if asking, "What now?" "We wait out the storm," Jonah said. Marin sank deeper into the quilt, her eyes following the glow of the fire. "Jonah?" "Yeah. I didn't think anyone would find me." Jonah didn't reply. He didn't trust his voice. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar pressing against the walls around his heart. Not hope, not yet, but proximity. The sort of closeness that could someday matter. The storm growled outside, rattling the shutters. Jonah glanced toward the window, then back at Marin. And Chapter 2 ends exactly where the summary intended, with Marin safely brought into Jonah's cabin, the storm trapping them together for the first long night. The storm did not roar at first. It whispered, long, low breaths drifting through the pine trees like an old spirit pacing outside the cabin walls. Jonah Riker had lived through enough Montana winters to know that the quiet ones were the most dangerous. They didn't announce themselves, they simply arrived, settled in, and waited to see who would survive the night. Inside the cabin, the fire in the stone hearth crackled softly, each pop of sap rising through the room like a question left unanswered. Marin Hale lay half-curled on the sofa, wrapped in Jonah's heavy quilt, her pale blonde hair falling in disheveled waves around her face. The heat had begun returning to her cheeks, tinting them a fragile rose. Her blue eyes followed the movement of the flames, as if they were the only things tethering her to reality. Shadow sat beside her like a guardian carved from smoke, ears forward, head held high, amber eyes studying every twitch of her fingers. The dog had only behaved like this once before. The first winter Jonah adopted him, during the nights when Jonah's nightmares came like avalanches. Shadow had parked himself at the bedside then, refusing to lie down, until Jonah's breathing finally settled. Tonight, Shadow's instincts had returned, sharp and unblinking. Jonah noticed. He didn't comment. He never commented when Shadow saw things before he did. Jonah moved around the cabin with calm efficiency, his tall frame casting long shadows against the log walls. Without removing his flannel shirt, he grabbed a cast-iron pot, poured water into it, and set it over the stove. Every movement was deliberate, quiet but purposeful, like someone who had spent years conserving energy under pressure. He did not look at Marin until he heard her speak. "Your home is—" She paused, searching for the right word. "Quiet." Jonah didn't turn. "I like quiet. It's different from the kind I'm used to." "Different how?" "The quiet I grew up in always felt expensive." She gave a weak, embarrassed smile. "Designer candles, curated minimalism, that kind of thing. The kind that looks good in magazines." Jonah stirred the rising steam with a wooden spoon. "Quiet isn't supposed to be bought." Marin flinched, not dramatically, but enough that Shadow noticed and inched closer, nudging his nose toward her knee. She let her fingers sink into the thick fur at his neck, grounding herself. Jonah finally turned. Marin didn't look wealthy now. She didn't look powerful or polished. She looked like someone stripped of everything except fear. Jonah had seen that expression before, in soldiers younger than she was, caught somewhere between lies they'd been taught and truths they weren't ready to face. He crossed the cabin, placed a steaming mug of ginger tea on the table beside her, and sat in the armchair opposite the sofa. "We'll be stuck inside until the storm passes," he said. "Could be a day. Could be 3. Marin nodded slowly. "I understand." He waited. "Do you want to tell me why you were alone in that cabin?" She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening in Shadow's fur, until the dog looked up at her with a soft huff. "I told you," she murmured. "My fiancé left me after an argument?" Jonah's voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. "And the door latch?" Marin froze. "You didn't mention that," Jonah added quietly. "That latch wasn't broken from age. Someone hit it. Hard." She looked away. I don't know." Shadow let out a single low growl, not at her but at the lie. The subtle ones were always the loudest. Jonah leaned back in his chair. He wasn't angry. He wasn't impatient. He was simply waiting, like the mountains waited for daylight. After several long breaths, Marin's shoulders trembled. "He said I embarrassed him," she whispered, "in front of investors. He said I made him look weak." Jonah's jaw tightened. He didn't like the sound of a man who needed the world to bend around his ego. "And," he said, "and he pushed me." Marin tugged the quilt closer around her. "Not hard enough to injure me, just hard enough to remind me that the only thing I controlled was whether I stayed quiet." Jonah's eyes darkened, but he didn't interrupt. "When the chair broke, he said it was my fault, that I provoked him." She brushed away a tear with the back of her hand. "Then he took the keys, took the car, and said he'd be back when I learned how to behave." Shadow rose slightly, fur bristling along his spine. Jonah placed a hand on the dog's back to calm him. "You're safe now," he said. His voice wasn't soft, but it had weight. Solid, immovable, the kind of voice someone could lean on without it giving way. The wind slammed against the cabin, rattling the shutters. Marin flinched, curling deeper under the quilt. Shadow immediately pressed himself against the sofa, anchoring her with quiet presence. Jonah shut the stove off and moved to the window, checking the shutters, reinforcing the latch with a wooden crossbar. "This storm's no joke," he said. "We need to prepare for a long night." Marin nodded shakily. "What do I do?" "Drink your tea, keep warm." He paused, searching her face. "And rest." She lowered her gaze. "I don't think I can." Jonah hesitated, then returned to his armchair. "There's nothing outside that door that can get in, and nothing in here that will hurt you. Shadow will make sure of that." Shadow made a soft sound of agreement. A beat of silence settled between them, gentle this time, not heavy like before. To distract her, Jonah rose and opened a small cabinet near the table, pulling out a few items: a folded map, a compass, a stack of well-worn books. Among them was a photograph placed inside a wooden frame, its corners scuffed from years of handling. Jonah paused before he set the photo aside, his thumb brushing the edge. Marin saw the hesitation. "Is she the woman you—" Jonah didn't answer immediately. The picture showed a woman with dark hair, freckles across her nose, and a smile too bright for a world as cold as the one Jonah now lived in. "Claire," he finally said, "my fiancé." Marin looked at him gently. "What was she like?" He thought for a long moment. The fire popped, filling the silence for him. "She loved the outdoors more than I did," he said. "She thought every storm was a story, every ridge a promise." "Was she—" "She died," Jonah said simply, finishing the sentence for her. "I was supposed to bring her home. I didn't." Marin lowered her eyes, guilt flickering in them, as if her own troubles seemed smaller beside grief like his. "You don't have to tell me more," she murmured. "I know." Jonah returned the photograph to the cabinet with a quiet finality. He didn't talk about Claire, ever, not to neighbors, not to family. Only Shadow had been allowed to sit with that grief, and tonight, somehow, Marin had heard her name on his lips. The storm intensified outside. Snow began sliding down the roof in heavy sheets. The cabin groaned, old wood shifting under the weight of winter. Marin watched the flames dance like restless spirits. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything. You didn't do anything wrong." "I lied," she said softly. "Or, at least, I didn't tell you the truth." "You don't owe me your story," Jonah replied, "but you owe yourself safety. That's enough for tonight." Shadow leaned into her again, this time resting his head on her lap, an act of trust he did not give easily. Marin broke into a fragile smile. The storm roared now, full and fierce, its quiet beginning finally shedding its disguise. Jonah stoked the fire, checked the windows once more, and returned to sit in his chair. Inside the cabin, time slowed. The world narrowed to 3 heartbeats, the steady one in Jonah's chest, the frantic one in Marin's, and the loyal, rhythmic thud inside Shadow's warm body. Outside, the blizzard sealed them in. Inside, safety settled over the room like an old, forgotten blessing. And the long night began. Night in Winter Haven had a way of settling into the bones, finding the cracks in the heart long before it found the cracks in the cabin's walls. The blizzard outside had grown into a living thing, howling, clawing, pushing against the shutters with a fury that felt personal. Snow whirled so thickly that even the windows, fogged from the heat inside, buzzed faintly under the relentless assault. Inside, the firelight painted soft, golden lines across the cabin's worn floorboards. The room was warm, almost too warm, the kind of heat that made exhaustion seep deeper and faster. Marin Hale lay with her back against the sofa cushions, Shadow's head resting heavily across her lap, the dog's breathing slow and even. Her fingers traced the ridge of fur along his neck in rhythmic strokes meant to soothe both of them. Jonah Riker sat in his old rocking chair a few feet away, sharpening a utility knife with slow, deliberate movements. Not because he needed to, not tonight, but because his hands needed something to do, something real, something grounding. The rhythm of metal against stone created a soft scraping sound that mingled with the storm's distant fury. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Sometimes silence was safer than words. Sometimes it was sharper. Marin felt that silence pressing on her chest now. Jonah's presence was steady, protective, and perhaps the first genuinely safe place she had stepped into in years. But that made the truth harder to hold inside. Every breath she took felt like a stone she had to carry. Jonah finally glanced up. The fire's glow carved lines across his face, highlighting the firmness of his jaw, the deep-set shadows beneath his eyes. "You should rest," he said. Marin shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him, the way he looked at me." Jonah paused mid-stroke. "Your fiancé." She didn't respond. She didn't have to. Shame and fear flickered like ghosts beneath her lashes. Shadow lifted his head briefly, sensing the shift in the room. He nudged Marin's shoulder once, a silent reassurance before settling again. Jonah returned to sharpening the knife. "People like him rely on fear to control things they can't earn," he said quietly. "Respect, loyalty, love. You don't know him." "No," Jonah said, "but I've met his type." Marin bit her lower lip. "And what type is that?" Jonah didn't hesitate. "Weak." The word struck her like a bell, sharp, true, unforgiving, just like the mountain. She looked into the fire. He wasn't always like that. Jonah didn't argue, because he had learned that everyone had a story for why they stayed too long, why they forgave too much, why they carried bruises no one else could see. He simply waited. After several long breaths, Marin spoke again. "My mother used to say I was born in the wrong body," she said softly. "Too gentle, too trusting, too eager to please." She let out a brittle laugh. "She said women like me were made for rich men, not for real life." Jonah froze. The knife stopped. The whetstone silenced. Marin continued, her voice trembling. "She raised me to be ornamental, polished, graceful, but never loud, never confrontational, never someone who could make men uncomfortable." Jonah's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "I thought Vincent wanted me for who I was," she whispered. "Not the polished version, but as soon as the engagement papers were drafted, I became something else, something owned." Shadow lifted his head again, amber eyes fixed on her face, as if tracking each wound in her voice. "Why didn't you leave?" Jonah asked, not accusingly, but gently, the way one asks someone why they didn't notice their boat sinking until the water was at their knees. "Because he never hit me," Marin said softly. "Not at first. He pushed, he yelled, he blamed, but he never hit." She wrapped the quilt tighter around herself. "Until last night." Jonah didn't move. Inside him, something old and painful shifted. Echoes of soldiers who had looked at him the same way. People caught in storms that didn't come from the sky. Before he could speak, the wind slammed against the cabin hard enough to rattle the lantern on the table. Marin startled violently, her breath catching. Jonah rose immediately. "It's just the wind," he said. "Storm's throwing a tantrum." Marin forced a nod. Jonah moved window to window, checking each shutter. The storm wasn't just gathering, it was building pressure like a held breath. As he returned to stoke the fire, Shadow suddenly stiffened. His ears shot forward, his body tensed. The fur along his spine rose like a cresting wave. Marin felt it instantly. "Shadow?" she whispered. The dog growled, not loud, but deep, low, instinctive. Jonah immediately crossed to the front door. He didn't open it, but he listened, one hand resting near the hunting knife sheathed in the wood stand. After a tense pause, the growl eased. Shadow lay down again, though his gaze stayed fixed on the entryway, as if daring it to betray them. Marin swallowed. "Is someone out there?" "No," Jonah said, though his voice had shifted subtly. "Storms messing with the acoustics. Happens sometimes." But Marin could tell he wasn't fully convinced. When he returned to his chair, the air in the room felt tighter, stretched across invisible lines neither of them understood yet. Fatigue crept into Marin's limbs. Everything inside her wanted to surrender to sleep, but fear kept her awake. Jonah noticed. "You're safe," he said again. "Nothing's getting through those walls." Marin wanted to believe him. She really did. But the truth she had been hiding pressed painfully against her ribs. Not the truth about the fiancé, not the truth about the broken chair, no, the truth about herself. Jonah watched her, carefully. "What is it?" Marin's breath trembled. She paused, throat tight. "I just need a moment. Alone." Jonah stood. "Bathroom's to the right. Door sticks a little, but it'll close." Marin nodded, rising slowly. Shadow stayed glued to her side until Jonah gave a quiet command. "Stay." The dog obeyed, reluctantly. Marin slipped into the small bathroom. The door clicked shut. She leaned against the sink, breathing hard, staring at her reflection. Pale skin, storm-tossed hair, eyes full of secrets she wasn't ready to let loose. She splashed cold water on her face. But when she emerged, Jonah's expression changed. His eyes lowered, her legs, her stance. She froze. The blanket slipped slightly from her shoulders, revealing that she was standing with full balance, posture strong, legs steady. Nothing like the fragile paralysis she had led him to believe. Shadow's head jolted up. Jonah inhaled slowly, dangerously steady. "You walked." Marin's heart slammed into her ribs. "Jonah, I can explain." "Not tonight," he said, voice quiet as falling ice. "Not here." Shadow stood, uncertain, torn between the two of them. The storm outside screamed against the walls, as if echoing the tension now boiling inside, and in that moment, under that roof, with the blizzard sealing their world shut, the truth finally drew its first blade. Snow hammered the cabin like a relentless fist, shaking the shutters as if the mountain itself demanded entry. Night clung to Winter Haven with an unnerving stillness, broken only by the howl of the wind sweeping across the valley. Inside the dim cabin, the fire cast a trembling glow over the wooden walls, turning the space into a sanctuary built from light and shadows. But nothing in that warm, flickering room felt safe anymore. Jonah Riker stood frozen, shoulders squared, breath tight in his chest, staring at Marin Hale as if seeing her for the very first time. She stood just outside the bathroom door, blanket slipping slightly off her shoulders, legs planted firmly on the floor, steady, alive, strong. The lie had been ripped open like a wound, bright and raw. Marin swallowed hard. "Jonah, please." Don't. His voice was calm, far too calm for the storm under it. Shadow shifted beside him, tail low, ears pinned back, torn between the two humans he trusted. Jonah's hands curled slowly at his sides, not in anger, but in restraint, every muscle taut, holding something dangerous inside. Marin forced a step forward, panic rising like heat in her throat. I wasn't trying to deceive you. Not the way it looks. Jonah's eyes narrowed, but he didn't raise his voice. You walked, after days of pretending you couldn't. The softness in him, the man who shared stories of his late wife, who built her a ramp with raw hands, was gone, replaced by a hollow weight she couldn't read. The wind slammed against the cabin, shaking the door in its frame. Marin flinched. Jonah didn't. Shadow let out a low, uncertain whine. Jonah, please, she whispered. I didn't do it to hurt you. Jonah turned away, walking toward the fire. You think intent erases impact? His voice was rough, carved by disappointment. He added another log to the flames, the embers sparking upward in a burst of angry orange. You lied to me in the one place lies don't survive. Marin felt the words like blows. Her breath trembled. I was scared. So was I, Jonah said quietly, still facing the fire. You were a stranger on my porch in a blizzard, and I trusted you anyway. She closed her eyes. I trusted you too. You trusted my shelter, he corrected. Not me. He finally faced her again. The storm outside paled against the storm behind his eyes. A moment of silence stretched between them, thin, fragile, threatening to snap. Shadow nudged Jonah's leg, sensing the tension building. Jonah ran a hand briefly over the dog's head, grounding himself before turning fully toward Marin. Sit, he said. It was not a request. Marin hesitated, then lowered herself to the sofa. Shadow remained beside her, torn but loyal to both, his gray fur bristling with unease. Jonah dragged a wooden chair across the floor and set it opposite her. Not close, not far. Exactly the distance of someone who refused to be fooled again. He sat, folded his hands, and waited. Marin's throat constricted. Where do I start? Start with the truth. She breathed in slowly, deeply, like someone standing on the edge of a cliff. My fiancé wasn't just controlling, she said. Vincent was cruel and powerful, too powerful. I didn't know how to leave him safely. Every step I took was watched, every message read, every mile tracked. Jonah didn't blink. So you staged a crisis, he said. Yes, Marin whispered, to test him, to see if he cared for the real me or just the version he wanted to display in public. And you brought that test here. I didn't expect the storm, she said. I didn't expect the wheelchair to break, or the cabin to be so cold, or your dog to find me first. Her voice cracked. I didn't expect any of this. Jonah leaned back slowly. And the paralysis? Marin looked down, shame burning her cheeks. It wasn't entirely a lie. She took a steadying breath. Stress-induced paralysis is real. I've had episodes before. But I wasn't paralyzed when you found me. I just... She swallowed. I didn't know how to stop the lie once you carried me inside. Jonah's jaw set. So you convinced yourself it was harmless. No, she said quickly. I convinced myself it was temporary, that I'd tell you once the storm ended. But the storm didn't end, and neither did the lie. The fire crackled. Shadows danced against the walls. Jonah watched her with the inscrutable stillness of someone who had suffered betrayal before and survived, but not without cost. Marin pressed trembling fingers to her temples. Jonah, I wasn't using you. I swear it. I was running from my life, and the only way I knew how to run was to disappear inside another story. Jonah stared at her for a long moment before speaking. Do you know what you asked of me? His voice was low, quiet, like a knife sliding free. To build for you, to protect you, to carry you, to believe in you. I know, she whispered, and all you gave me was a version of yourself that didn't exist. Marin flinched, tears filling her eyes. It wasn't malicious. It was survival, Jonah finished. I get that. She blinked, startled. But survival built on falsehoods becomes manipulation real quick. he added, not unkindly, just truthfully. And I won't live in a world of half-truths. Not again. The fire hissed sharply as if agreeing. Marin bowed her head. Shame tightened around her ribs like a vice. Shadow climbed halfway onto the sofa beside her, nudging her arm with soft, insistent pressure, as if reminding her she wasn't entirely alone. Jonah's expression softened by a fraction. Shadow doesn't choose people lightly, he said quietly, and he chose you. Marin looked at the dog, her voice trembling. I didn't deserve that. Maybe not then, Jonah said. Maybe now. Silence. A gentler silence. The kind that didn't bruise. Outside the storm roared, but inside something small and fragile shifted, like a frozen river cracking toward thaw. Jonah stood slowly. The storm's not letting up tonight. You stay here, on the couch, no lying, no walls. Marin nodded, wiping her cheek. Agreed. He paused by the hall, his voice calmer now. We start over at dawn. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't exile. Shadow hopped down from the couch and followed Jonah halfway before stopping, looking back at Marin, then at Jonah, then settling between them as if refusing to choose. When Jonah finally disappeared behind his door, Marin curled into the blanket. The fire warmed her face. Shadow rested against her feet, a silent guardian in the dim glow. The storm raged, but for the first time in days, Marin didn't feel lost inside it. Because truth, once spoken aloud, had a strange way of becoming a kind of anchor, or a doorway. And maybe, if dawn truly brought a new beginning, she wouldn't have to run anymore. Not from her life, not from herself, not from him. The storm had passed, but the mountain was never truly finished with its trials. Morning light spilled over the valley like a fragile promise, brushing across the half-buried cabin and the long shadows stretching from the pines. Inside the warm wooden walls, the world felt almost calm. Almost. But calm was a liar. Calm was the breath before the plunge. The 41-year-old man stirred first. He rose from his chair, joints stiff from a night half spent, listening for footsteps that never came. His dark brown hair, streaked with early gray, fell in loose waves over his forehead, and the rugged beard lining his jaw looked sharper in the morning light. Exhaustion had etched itself into his features, but something else lingered too. Resolve, perhaps, or acceptance, or the first faint thaw of forgiveness. On the sofa, the 26-year-old woman lay curled beneath a wool blanket, breathing softly. Her long, platinum blonde hair spilled across the cushions, catching the golden glow of dawn. She looked peaceful for the first time, as if sleep had finally embraced her without fear's cold hand on her throat. The 5-year-old German shepherd lay between them, smoky gray and black fur rising slowly with each breath. His amber eyes opened first, sharp and alert, long before either human noticed the shift in the air. He heard it, the unnatural crack. Not wind, not snow settling, not the woods groaning beneath winter's weight. A footstep, another. The dog sprang up, body rigid, a low growl forming deep within his chest. The man tensed instantly, instincts sharpened by years of survival etched into bone. Then, a fist slammed against the cabin door. The woman jolted awake, eyes wide with panic, her breath catching in a way that told the man everything without a single word spoken. "He found me," she whispered. "Oh God, he found me." The man moved swiftly, placing himself between her and the door. "Stay behind me." The fist hit the wood again, harder, angrier, splintering the frame. "Open the door!" a man's voice roared. "Do it now!" The woman shook her head violently, tears rising. "He's furious! I left him in that storm! He'll kill you! Please, don't open!" But the door didn't wait to be opened. It exploded inward. A towering figure marched through. A man in his early 30s, light-skinned, wearing an expensive coat soaked with melted snow, hair disheveled, face twisted with rage, and in his hand, clenched tight like a weapon, was a steel tire iron. The German shepherd lunged with a growl so deep it rattled the walls. "Stay back!" the stranger shouted, swinging wildly. The dog dodged, circling, eyes burning gold. The 41-year-old man stepped forward slowly, hands open, but body ready. "Put it down," he said, voice low, steady. "You don't want to—" "I want her," the stranger snarled, "and I'm not leaving without her." The woman cowered behind the man, shaking, uncontrollably. The sight only enraged the stranger further. "You think you can hide her from me?" he barked. "You think a washed-up veteran and his mutt can stop me?" The veteran didn't blink. Yes, and that was enough. The stranger lunged. The tire iron swung with lethal force, but the man dodged, grabbing the stranger's wrist and twisting it sharply. The two collided with the dining table, sending the utility knife clattering across the floor. The German shepherd leaped, clamping down on the stranger's coat sleeve, dragging, pulling, fighting with the ferocity of a creature defending its family. The stranger screamed, shoving the dog aside with a knee. The woman, trembling but no longer frozen, grabbed the fallen wool blanket and threw it over the man's eyes. It lasted only a second, but a second was enough. The 41-year-old veteran moved like a memory of battle rising from long sleep. He pinned the stranger against the wall, forearm pressing hard enough to make the tire iron fall from numb fingers. His gray-streaked hair fell over his face, rugged beard tight with fury, held barely in check. "You will not hurt her," he growled, voice low and lethal. The stranger gasped, scrambling. "She's mine. She's—" "No," the woman said behind him, voice shaking but strong. "I was never yours." For a moment, the stranger saw something he had never expected. Her spine straight, her chin lifted, her fear burned away by truth. He tried to surge forward again, but the German shepherd blocked him, stance wide, smoky gray fur bristling, amber eyes blazing with warning that needed no translation. The veteran tightened his grip. "You need to leave this mountain, now, and if you come back—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The stranger looked at the man, at the dog, at the woman whose fear had finally turned into resolve, and he understood. He stumbled backward out the door, slipping on the snow as he retreated toward the tree line. His shouts echoed down the valley, swallowed quickly by wind and distance. Silence returned like a held breath released. Slowly the man turned. The woman, still shaking, stared at him in disbelief. "You saved me. You saved yourself," he said gently. "I just finished what you started." The German shepherd approached her, pressing his head against her knee. She let out a sob, not of fear but relief, and buried her fingers in his smoky gray fur. The man knelt beside both of them. His muted green eyes softened. "You okay?" She nodded through tears. "I didn't know I could be brave until this moment." "Bravery isn't about never being afraid," he said. "It's about choosing who you become after fear." She swallowed hard. "Then I want to become someone. Honest. Someone who doesn't need lies to be seen." He reached out, gently brushing a platinum blonde strand from her cheek. "Then stay. Stay and heal. Stay and start over. Not for me, for you." Her eyes softened with something like hope. "And for you, too?" He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Maybe for both of us." The German shepherd barked once, short and bright, as if declaring the moment sealed, and outside, the sunlight finally broke through the last torn edge of storm cloud, golden, warm, like the first quiet blessing of a long-awaited miracle. Sometimes God sends miracles in quiet shapes, not in thunders or burning skies, but in a loyal dog who lays his head on a wounded heart, in a veteran who still chooses kindness after loss, and in a woman who finds courage to step out of a gilded cage. This story reminds us that healing rarely arrives with fanfare. It often comes through small acts of honesty, unexpected compassion, and the gentle ways God weaves people together at the exact moment they need one another. In our everyday lives, we often walk past blessings disguised as storms. We forget that even the hardest blizzards can lead us to places where truth is reborn and where love grows in the cracks left by sorrow. If there is anything to carry from this journey, it is this simple truth: God has not forgotten you. He works quietly, faithfully, through the hands of others, through loyal animals, through moments that feel accidental but are part of His careful design. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. and help our small community grow by subscribing to the channel. May God bless every viewer who joined this journey, and may His grace bring warmth to your home, peace to your heart, and strength for the road ahead. If you believe God still works miracles in the quiet, comment Amen below.